body and grinding down the center.
Okay, we'll start with this. It's fight week for Natasha Jonas, Miss Great Britain, who will be opposite the ring, Marie-Eve Caire, this Saturday in a 3-belt unification match in the junior middleweight division. We've talked about this fight and how I like Tasha's chances in this fight, I do. Even though Natasha's the naturally smaller fighter, I actually think she's a stronger puncher than Marie-Eve Caire. Natasha Jonas, Miss Great Britain, she's about 2 years older than Marie-Eve Caire, though to the eye, in spite of being the older fighter, she's somewhat faster. Natasha being the naturally smaller fighter that moved up in weight might have something to do with that. She does seem to have a speed advantage. She seems to have more snap on her shots, more snap on her punches than most junior middleweights that are out there, Marie-Eve Caire included. Marie-Eve Caire, who's actually one of the faster junior middleweights, though doesn't appear faster to the eye, at least to me. She's not faster to the eye than Natasha Jonas. They're both southpaws, so they're on an even keel in that department. They both lead with their right hand. Champion versus champion, southpaw versus southpaw. Natasha Jonas sports a professional record of 12 wins with 2 losses, 1 draw, 8 knockouts. To Marie-Eve Caire's 18 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 1 knockout, just 1 recorded knockout. Natasha Jonas hasn't been campaigning as a junior middleweight all that long. She hasn't, but it's safe to say that going into this fight, she is the bigger puncher. You know, she's a bigger puncher than Marie-Eve Caire. Marie-Eve Caire's far from a knockout merchant. She don't win fights through strength of arms. Marie-Eve Caire is your, according to Hoyle, pure boxer, looking to box on the outside, maintain distance, whilst backpedaling. She ain't the kind of fighter that takes it to her opponent. She's more likely to lay off than lay into her quarry, lay into the girl opposite the ring. She's a pure boxer. Her calling card is long-distance fighting on the balls of her feet. That's what she does. Thus, the onus... Natasha Jonas is going to have to apply pressure on Marie-Eve Caire. Force her to fight or force her to run. Marie-Eve Caire characteristically fights on the fly, so it's going to be up to Natasha to cut the ring off, pin her down, and unload hard shots to, at minimum, seem the busier fighter, the busier puncher in the eyes of the judges. So that even if Marie-Eve Caire is fighting negative, you can still win the rounds on activity. Marie, who will have considerable ring rust to have to shake off. Marie, who last saw action way back there in December of last year. She's basically been out of action for the last 11 months. She was busier last year than she was this year. This will be her first fight in the year of 2022, towards the tail end of it. She started off the year last year dropping a decision to Clarissa Shields in what was the undisputed junior middleweight title fight that was in March of last year. She rebounded off the loss with Cynthia Lozano, then unbeaten Cynthia Lozano for what was the newly vacated blue belt, the newly vacated IBF title. Subsequent 11 months that followed, she hasn't seen any action, so she will have considerable ring rust to shake off this weekend. Natasha, comparatively, she's been more active. You know, she fought 2 times last year. She's already seen action 2 times this year. Once in February against Chris Namis, then again this past September, the Patricia Bergoult fight. And that kind of schedule, you know, keeping a fighter active, keeping the fighter busy, that results in a sharper fighter. And I am banking on Natasha Jonas being the comparatively sharper, snappier fighter the night of the fight, as opposed to Marie, who will have ring rust to shake off. I believe that Natasha Jonas has to apply pressure on Marie, educated pressure, to, at minimum, appear the busier fighter in the fight. Pressure, as they say, busts pipes. Pressure is the pure boxer's kryptonite, forcing them to trade punches, forcing them into exchanges, forcing them to fight, sucking them into a war. Pure boxers, they don't like that. Pure boxer wants to fight at a controlled pace, from a safe distance, on their toes, circling away from their quarry, And the second they lose control over the situation, more often than not, the pure boxer starts to come apart at the seams. Think about what we just saw between Rakhimov and Zilpha Barrett. It's a similar dynamic here. And as stated, what Natasha Jonas has to do is force Marie-Eve Caire to fight or force her to give up ground so that she can appear the busier fighter and the ring general in the eyes of the judges round after round. And rounds in the sport of boxing, sport of women's boxing, as we all know, they fly by.
Yeah, it's a 2-minute round. It's over before you know it. If Marie-Eve Caire spends the better portion of a 2-minute round circling away from Natasha, well, that's not going to win you the round, I'm sorry to say.
I believe that Natasha Jonas has the right speed and power to put Marie-Eve Caire on her back foot, which will result in her sacrificing several rounds to stay out of harm's way. And if by some chance Marie-Eve Caire tries to stand her ground, well, she's not as good mid-range to inside as Natasha Jonas. Marie-Eve Caire's sweet spot is mid-range to outside, not inside. She's got no inside game. Tasha does.
She tries to stand her ground and assert herself to Natasha Jonas, she's going to be on the receiving end of a lot of hard shots, a lot of hard punches. So I am going with Natasha Jonas to win this fight by way of a points decision. I don't know that she knocks out someone as defensively responsible as Marie-Eve Caire.
I don't think she knocks her out, but I do think she can outwork her. She can outpoint her, unless we forget, in the event that there are any close rounds that you could swing to either fighter, it's Natasha that has home field advantage, and Natasha is the house fighter. So Natasha Jonas, by way of a points decision, is the pick, and I think she will add a third belt, a third alphabet title to her collection this weekend. And super middleweight news, this past weekend, unbeaten WBA regular champion David Morrell was in action
in defense of his WBA regular title against Yerbusinuli, and we all know what happened. We all know that he eventually stopped the guy very late in the fight.
Yerbusinuli took a lot of punishment in that thing. It was Dan Canobio of CompuBox who stated, I understand Morrell versus Yerbusinuli was not a mismatch on paper, but it certainly was from round 6 on. How did everyone at home see the signs, but not those closest to the action? A stout observation. Watching that thing,
The guy was taking a lot of hard shots, got dropped really hard late in the fight, and you could see he was worse for wear. Post-fight,
reports indicated that Yerbusinuli was hospitalized and placed into an induced coma, likely to alleviate swelling in the brain. We've seen this happen more than once in the sport of boxing. Jake Donovan tweeted, at the risk of contributing to differing reports, Suleiman Promotions, Eidos Yerbusinuli's promoter, confirmed the boxer is in a medically induced coma at Hennepin County Medical Center in Minneapolis, but dismissed claims of his being in critical condition as misinformation. Suleiman team insist doctors have informed them his condition is not life-threatening and expect a full recovery, but will remain under observation for at least 2 weeks. Yerbusinuli was admitted to HCMC after a 12th round knockout loss to David Morrell on Saturday nearby at the Armory.
based on the aesthetic of the match and how much punishment he took, there were genuine concerns post-fight, when news broke that he was hospitalized, that there might be swelling in the brain and just injuries of that nature that can be life-threatening.
As I was watching that thing, I recall thinking to myself that the referee has allowed this fight to go on for too long, and that second knockdown, that brutal knockdown, it was unnecessary. The fight should have been stopped before it came to that.
If anything, Yerbusinuli's corner should have been the ones to stop this thing if the referee didn't, because they knew the condition of their fighter. They knew what they were seeing. That guy was just getting his bell rung round after round. They should have stopped.
Ahead of the fight, I said it, David Morrell, in spite of only having 7 or 8 fights, 7 or 8, a grand total of just 7 or 8 fights. He's got a very high ceiling, this guy. He's young, about 24 years old. He can punch.
And he shows promise.
And he is the super middleweight division's WBA regular champion, holding the secondary version of Canelo Alvarez's full WBA title. His trainer, Ronnie Shields, says Morrell wants to fight Canelo, but of course, Canelo's not going to fight him.
And of course, you being his trainer, you're going to talk him up.
Of course. I don't want him to get into chasing Benavidez or chasing Caleb Plant, Ronnie Shields, Morrell's trainer, told BoxingScene.com. Benavidez is a secondary champion. Morrell wants to fight Canelo, but of course, Canelo's not going to fight him. It's up to the management, like always. What's next, And I've just got to come up with the game plan for whoever's next.
Just conflicting information, because where Ronnie Shields says that he doesn't want David Morrell to get into the habit of chasing around David Benavidez, it was David Morrell himself who called him out by name. has been calling him out by name.
And ahead of this weekend's fight, we talked about that here on the channel, that David Morrell still seems to have David Benavidez on the brain. Those two guys are in proximity of each other. They both fight under the PBC banner on the same platforms. There's no reason that fight shouldn't happen beyond Plant versus Benavidez, set to go down early next year.
There's no excuses for it.
I said it would take 2 or 3 fights to get him to where I want him to be, Shields said. You seen the difference Saturday night from the past 2 fights. He boxed when he had to box. He stayed in the middle of the ring like I wanted him to. A couple of times he got on the ropes when he wasn't supposed to. I had to jump on him about that. But overall, yeah, he did 100% what we trained to do.
What are you going to do? You're going to be the next guy that takes a number, stands online, single file, waiting for Canelo Alvarez? You're supposed to be in proximity of the fights you need. The fights that David himself claims to want. A David Benavidez fight.
Being able to get that fight, get the winner of Benavidez versus Plant in the ring, I should say, being able to get that fight shouldn't be a problem because it's an in-house situation, an in-house affair. And what opponent is more ideal for David Morrell than the winner of that fight? This is a fighter with under 10 fights, you understand. He exhibits a high ceiling,
But he's not a household name. He is still developing as a fighter and developing as a marquee attraction. He has a very fan-friendly style, action guy, punches hard.
he, like many fighters at or around these weights, is vying for a Canelo Alvarez fight, and that's understandable. Canelo Alvarez is the man to beat at 168 pounds. The disconnect, however,
The disconnect is when you start seeing a fighter act like it's Canelo and nobody else.
kind of like what we've been seeing from Jermall Charlo the last couple of years, kind of like what we've been seeing from David Benavidez for the most part. Him as well. He is just now getting around to fighting Caleb Plant when he should have fought that guy at least 2 or 3 years ago when they were both champions.
You don't get around to fighting this guy until after Canelo Alvarez knocks him out and takes his belt. Now you want to fight him?
You know, that fight should have happened already. In any event, David Morrell is one of many fighters that aspires to get Canelo Alvarez in the ring, and there's nothing wrong with that, but the disconnect is that you shouldn't fight other people while you wait. No, you should. You should, because you're not going to build your brand, you're not going to amass a following, marquee value. These important components to a boxer's career, their marketability.
David Morrell doesn't even have 10 fights yet, not even 10 fights.
You want a Canelo Alvarez fight, you say? Well, who doesn't? What are you going to do in the mean in-between time? You've capped off the year with a highlight reel knockout over a then unbeaten fighter, and early next year, 2 of your PBC stablemates, they're set to lock horns. I see no reason that David Morrell shouldn't fight the winner of that fight, whoever the winner is, while he waits.
Why shouldn't they be able to make that fight internally between David and the winner of that fight? It's an in-house fight. Top Rank does it all the time. So does Matchroom.
I'm not saying that David shouldn't target Canelo Alvarez. I'm just saying that if that fight don't happen in a jiffy, and in all likelihood it won't, and an order doesn't come down, what are you going to do in the mean in-between time? You're on the same side of the street as some of the somebodies at 168 pounds, and while you wait for Canelo, you should fight them. And just in keeping with the theme of men's super middleweight news, Eddie Hearn on David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant. That's the kind of fight that's going to put Benavidez in a great position to fight Canelo. I know what he's like. If Benavidez puts in a great performance and everyone starts calling for it, he'd have no problem fighting David Benavidez.
Fighter who's got a lot of hyperbole attached to him these days.
Listen, I don't think Plant versus Benavidez is a bad fight. It's a good fight. It's an intriguing fight, an interesting fight. It is. But the idea that all David has to do is go in there with a guy that Canelo already knocked out late last year, a guy that he could have taken on before Canelo, long before Canelo put the pause on him. The idea that all David has to do to emerge as a front runner is knock out a guy that Canelo already knocked out.
It's a bit convenient.
It is. Canelo Alvarez is the super middleweight division's undisputed champion, you understand. He's got all the alphabet titles and mandatory challengers in the queue for every single one of them. David Morrell by way of the WBA, David Benavidez by way of the WBC, the winner of Zach Parker versus John Ryder by way of the WBO.
William Skull of Cuba is the #1 contender by way of the IBF.
Some fights have more marquee value than others, some do, though ultimately, all these mandatory challengers and all these potential opponent options that Canelo has on the table, these guys are interchangeable. No one has really done anything to stand out from the rest. Nobody's really set themselves apart and put distance between themselves and everyone else. And that does apply to David Benavidez, because here he is fighting a guy that he could have fought years ago when they were both champions reigning parallel to each other on the same side of the street, under the same promotional banner, more or less, fighting on the same platforms, and you're just now getting around to fighting this guy after Canelo's already stopped him and taken his belt.
It's a bit convenient for me, Zach Parker, unbeaten Zach Parker, WBO interim champion. He's about to fight a more solid guy this year than David Benavidez fought this year. He's about to fight John Ryder.
John Ryder is more proven as a super middleweight, more proven as a super middleweight at least than David Lemieux. And all David Benavidez did this entire year was knock out, past it, over the hill, utterly spent David Lemieux. And this
goes back to what I said. What exactly has David done that the other guys haven't done? What has he done that's supposed to set him apart, that's supposed to make him special? Oh, because he's finally fighting Caleb Plant?
Should have fought Caleb Plant a long time ago. You go in there now. You knock him out now. Does it really mean now what it meant before?
No.
When he was an unbeaten champion, when he was in possession of the red belt. It was a missed opportunity, and I'm not letting go of that.
Eddie Hearn seems to think that David potentially knocking out Caleb would put him in a great position to fight Canelo Alvarez, though in truth, I don't think it does that much more for him than Zach Parker potentially knocking out John Ryder would do for him.
They're interchangeable. They're all interchangeable as far as I'm concerned. I could go for a Benavidez fight, of course, but I could just as easily go for a Zach Parker fight or a David Morrell fight.
Or a Jermall Charlo fight.
Or an Andrade fight, a Demetrius Andrade fight. Pick your poison. Canelo Alvarez has a myriad of options because these guys, they're not doing their due diligence to take out the competition so they can, in effect, separate themselves from everyone else. You swoop in well after Canelo Alvarez knocked this guy out. Does that really make you special?
We'll see how it goes. There's some out there who are convinced that David Benavidez, he might actually lose that Caleb Plant fight because Caleb is a more defensively responsible fighter and a better counterpuncher than any fighter that David Benavidez has fought so far.
There's truth in that. So much of what David Benavidez does inside of the squared circle, the flashy shoe shines,
throwing all those uppercuts in sequence, what he did to Porky Medina, more recently what he did to David Lemieux. It looks good on camera, looks good on TV, but in reality,
the level of competition you're facing might have a lot to do with why you get away with all that flashy stuff. When you fight somebody that's halfway decent, somebody with a pulse, can you still be the quote-unquote Mexican monster?
Caleb Plant fight will attempt to answer that question, though I reiterate, it's very convenient that you're just now fighting this guy after Canelo knocked him out. Why didn't you fight him when he was an unbeaten fighter? Why didn't you fight him when he was an unbeaten champion? Before Canelo even started that undisputed campaign, why didn't you take care of that guy?
Some would have you believe that Canelo Alvarez is attempting to circumvent a David Benavidez fight by going up there to light heavyweight and swapping punches with guys like Dimitri Bivol.
If it's that easy, why hasn't David Benavidez done it?
So yeah, Plant versus Benavidez is an interesting fight, but let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Given your reputation, the very least you can do is knock out Caleb.